Welcome back to the Hex Drinkers House of Commons, your one-stop shop for all things competitive and at the common rarity. Chev, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Recording this right after a game night with one of the guys from PDH Pod and Big B Blake, which we'll get into in a little bit after this. So my brain is full of Pauper, and I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, we have a lot of things to discuss on today's episode. You know, 3 is a magic number, right? So we really figured we were going to jam pack it. So let's start just jamming through. First off, we are your source for all things competitive and at the common rarity, which in this case includes 60 card normal Pauper. We had a quote unquote like emergency banned and restricted update today, September 19th, and we have banned Era Kokra Sneak, Stirring Bard, Underdark Explorer, and Vicious Battle Rager. Now, you don't really need to know what any of these cards do. They just all involve the initiative.
Right. We're essentially banning initiative. I think there's like 1 or 2 other cards that still have the mechanic, but they don't really see play. These are the main ones. We've talked about one of these cards before, particularly in PDC's context, where we saw just how brutal it could be. So in something like 60 card where you can run 4 of them, it's just going to be worse. And even as we saw in games today with PDH, initiative can really kind of take something and run with it. And when you're talking about 60 card 2 and you somehow manage to keep the initiative with a 1/5 on the board, and you get to that, look at the top 10 and put a creature down with 3 1/1 tokens and hexproof, things are going to go downhill.
As Wizards continues to print cards and make all cards more powerful, not only the rares and mythic rares, but the commons, we have started to see that Pauper gets thrown drastically out of whack when things like this happen, especially when it's
a multiplayer mechanic. Yeah, Monarch threw it out too. We got that 1 and 2 blue, tap down a creature and then gain Monarch.
That was like the first casualty of multiplayer mechanics in Pauper.
Yeah, anytime we get a multiplayer mechanic and common cards in it, it's just no good for 2-player. So this makes sense. I think there's some murmurs that this is going to bring back affinity to the kind of the forefront. We won't go too much into it because we're not... While we are your one-stop shop for all things competitive and at the common rarity, we have yet to fully dive into 2-player Pauper 60 cards. So maybe we can get Brad or something on here to give a more in-depth analysis.
Definitely something we should look into in the future, but I hope that this is going to at least make the metagame better, because from what I have heard of people who do play Pauper, this kind of Pauper, 60-card Pauper, religiously, the format was not good.
Yeah.
So... hopefully this is a step in the right direction.
It took them a long time to get the initiative and gate cards onto online. And I remember hearing that like the Paper Pauper meta was splitting from the online because Paper had access to initiative and Pauper Online didn't. And Pauper Online was like, we need these cards. They're changing the game. We need them. And then they got them and it was like, oh no, go back. So
exactly.
A time when MTGO moved a little too fast before they realized the problems. That's it for 60 card. Let's talk about right where we came from. We're actually recording this like an hour and a half later than we normally do because we just did game nights with Brad, one of the hosts of the PDH Pod, every Monday and Saturday evenings, 6 p.m. Central, runs PDH nights. All of this is available on Brad Drac V's Twitter. There's a sign-up list in Excel you can jump on. So Julian and I wanted to jump on his first Monday stream and see what it was about. We played with Blake. We got in 2 great games, and honestly, some of the most interactive we've seen in a while, I think.
Yeah, it was a great time. Thank you to Brad for having us on. It was an interesting little meta. We had Blake on Satyr Enchanter. We had Brad Cormella, the, of course, Grixis Streets of New Capenna commander that we've seen in many a combo light in the database, but this was actually steal your stuff and sack it tribal.
Yeah, threaten tribal.
The rationale was because she's a thief.
Yep.
And that's it. And you know what? That's good enough for us. And then you and I both played commanders from Dominaria United. Coincidentally, both Rakdos commanders.
Yes.
I was on Tor Wacky the Younger, and you were on Garna Bloodfist of Keld.
It was good enough for Cormella. It wasn't good enough for Brad. Unfortunately, the threatened build of Cormella, at least at the casual level, it didn't really hold up into what we were expecting. But I think every other deck did exactly what you'd expect it to do. I don't think currently we have a Satyr Enchanter list on the database. That's not because we don't believe that Satyr Enchanter is competitive, as we saw tonight with an Armadillo Cloak, stacking instances of lifelink, multiple forms of protection, all this kind of crazy stuff. What was that? It was like Chains of Gossamer or something, Gossamer Chains, where you can bounce it to hand to fog a creature and just keep playing it for value. Like, Satyr Enchanter is incredibly good. The creator of the list for the database database just took it off. So we're actually looking for a new one. If you got a Satyr Enchanter list, let us represent that it is one of the most powerful decks just due to that resource engine. As Julian said, I was on Garna, Bloodfist of Keld. My overall feelings were I think it didn't quite do what I was expecting it to, where the idea of the deck and philosophy was as many token generators as possible, empty the Warrens, Dragon Fodder, Hordling Outburst, anything that makes these 1/1 goblins that I can then swing with, and then either they die in combat, and I draw cards, or they make it through and ping our opponents a little bit. With sack outlets available to kind of sack them when I want, and of course taking advantage of the often misunderstood cleanup step of combat, which happens after damage is dealt, but before combat is over, you can still do game actions. This is how reconnaissance works to give all of your creatures vigilance. So I thought the deck did decently. It didn't win either of the games, but I really liked what I was seeing out of that sort of engine with Garna and drawing cards, etc., etc.
Your deck was really sick. I think the philosophy's in the right place. I think something that should be said is that we signed up for this, I want to say like last Thursday.
Yes.
And
it was
we were
a short
like,
brewing period.
well, shoot, we need some decks. So you and I brewed our decks over the weekend. Mm-hmm. There's certainly more tech to be found, but I think your deck, if it gets a little bit more streamlined, is definitely something that's certainly super powerful for normal PDH, maybe even CPDH if we can start talking things like combos and stuff. But yeah, that intricacy of the end of the damage step is just so many times you were it almost I don't know what it is about these Rakdos commanders and you drawing all these cards, Chev, but like it almost felt like an Azra Oddsmaker thing.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, why is he always drawing all these cards? It's ridiculous.
It was a few steps away, but two notable plays, and then I'll pass over the mic to talk about Torwaki. One was in game one, and it was really what led to the end state of the game. Julian cast, was it Evan Carr's Justice in that game too? That just nuked the board and killed. Yes. Evan Carr's Justice with Torwalki out dealt 3 damage to every creature, which essentially wiped the board. I had 6 creatures, 4 goblins, a Falconwrath Noble, and Garna out. Since it wasn't combat, I was able to deal a massive amount of damage. I believe it was 17 damage in total to take out Brad, do a decent amount of damage to Blake, and then bring Julian down to 1. I didn't want to kill Julian because Julian had 22 damage on the stack, and I was like, I would rather see that go places than be up against a Satyr Enchanter list alone. So, and then it ended up in a 1v1 scenario. And then in the second game, some very good plays with goblins being dropped onto the battlefield that, again, fell victim to an Evan Carr's Justice that Julian had the audacity to buy back at least 3 times, clearing my board from being able to really take advantage of the engine. But it's the kind of thing where if we get a little bit more support and we're not up against another Rakdos deck, it could be a little bit more meta dependent, but I think there's a lot there to explore.
Yeah, your deck was sick. It was doing a lot of the kind of like just grindy sacrifice recursion stuff, and then pinging things to death, which I also happen to enjoy.
Yes.
Pinging things to death. Torwaki honestly performed really well. I ended up winning that first game. That was probably like my favorite part of the whole night was I had Torwaki out. Plus, I had Hissing Iguanar, which says whenever a creature dies, deal 1 damage to target player. Chev, you had your Garna trigger plus your Falconwrath Aristocrat.
Right.
So when I cast Evan Carr's Justice, and I actually was also gave Torwaki Undying as well, so he stayed on the battlefield. But yeah, when I cast Evan Carr's Justice, I want to say something like 11 or 12 creatures died.
Yeah, it was 11 creatures, so you were dealing 22 damage, which these wide swaths of damage is not something I'm used to seeing in PDH a lot of the time. But between that and then the 17 that I dealt, it was just like, we had to do math, which is a new one for me.
We had to discuss like triggers going in the stack, who's active player, who resolves first. It was my turn, I was active player, and Chev's stuff would resolve first. I really thought he was just going to come through and nuke me. And I appreciate you making, I want to say the smart play of allowing my stuff to resolve, because otherwise, part of the reason why we were in such a predicament was Blake had several different suited up creatures with auras over the course of the game, including one creature that had hexproof.
Yes.
At one point, which was, it turns out a 5/5 hexproof is like very hard to deal with, at least with the stuff we were working with. So even though I felt like I was consistently just like, boom, all of a sudden I'm dealing like 7 damage a turn. He's like, I'm just gaining 7 back with my Armadillo Cloak and stuff. It was a struggle.
And then the fact that Armadillo Cloak does not actually grant lifelink. It's a separate ability, the way it used to be worded, of whenever deals damage, gain that much life, which stacks with lifelink. So if you get both of those on a creature, you gain twice as much life. The hexproof token came from a Jade Light Pioneer, I believe it was. A forgettable common from Ixalan, except for the fact it makes a 1/1 hexproof merfolk.
I was going to say, that's the only thing it does.
Yes. In that deck, we also saw a Silhani Ledgewalker. Everything you'd expect from like 60 card. I played Boggles for a little while back in the day. Everything you get from that, just on a larger scale and with much more dangerous enchantments. So there was a reason we were there, and I knew for a fact that once the board got wiped, because Garna was dying as a 4/3 to this Evankar's Justice in game 1, Falconwrath Nobles a 2/2, and my 4 Goblins, recovery speed for me is going to be much slower than a Selesnya deck. When we saw in game 2, Satyr Enchanter kept coming back, because each time it comes out, Blake would draw 3 to 4 cards, which would give you enough lands to be able to play it the next turn and then get those enchantments. And really, that game ended when just drew enough enchantments to put up with Julian's chump blockers.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. We had a similar experience where it was a combination of Chev's things dying plus me dealing damage with Tor plus I want to say once again Evankar's Justice. What a card!
What a card!
Just happened to wipe out both Brad and Chev and not Blake. And even though he was only on, I want to say like 6 life or so, he had a like 6/6 Satyr Enchanter, and I was nearly dead. So I was continued. I literally cast Tor. I want to say like 3 or 4 turns in a row just to chump block.
Not where you want to be with a 4-mana commander.
Yeah, and then eventually he drew something that had life and gained like 10 life.
He drew lifelink. Well. It was the card lifelink that costs 1 white and gives a creature lifelink. Overall, amazing games. It felt very balanced for the fact that we were all playing, or 3 of us were playing Rakdos Plus, because there was a Grixis list and 2 Rakdos. We were able to deal with a lot of threats. It didn't feel like we were missing out much. Like I know sometimes we feel like in EDH when there's 3 of us or a bunch of us are on Gruul and we find we can't deal with enchantments, because even the worst ones, it's still the creature that's the threat and that you usually have a way to deal with.
All right, well, let's be real. We couldn't deal with enchantments this time either, and that
True. That did cause some problems. Some graveyard hate was very necessary to get rid of them. There was probably the last card I'll talk about was... Do you remember the name of the card that Blake played towards the end? It was 1 and a white.
It was like Mine Excavation or something?
Yeah, Mine Excavation. That I'd never seen that before. That was amazing. It was 1 and a white. Put target artifact or enchantment from your graveyard into your hand, but it had Conspire. Conspire is you tap a certain number of creatures, you get to copy the spell. So he was able to try to bring back both a Armadillo Cloak and an Ethereal Armor from his graveyard back to hand, which is, for 2 mana, is insane. Game's good. Satyr Enchanter continues to overperform.
We need that back in the
Yes.
We need that back in the database, because that deck, being able to just draw a million cards, obviously, right? Like we talk about Tatiova, it's like, okay, well, we're doing this, almost the same thing with Satyr Enchanter.
Almost better. We can play more enchantments per turn than we can play lands.
True. And plus, we're gaining a ton of life, which is certainly, when you're gaining 6 life or 7 life at a time, it's not negligible by any means. And finally, we can play the Boggles thing, right? We have these like untargetable kind of, you can't mess with these sort of things. It's just really hard to get around them. So it definitely deserves a spot in the database. And that being said, I think even though we were not playing specifically CPDH,
high-powered jank, I believe, is what they refer to it as usually.
Fair enough. But it felt competitive.
Yes.
And it felt not to the same level, a normal CPDH game would be, but it felt competitive, and there felt like there was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
And a lot of good gameplay.
PDH continues to be where I've seen the stack most used. Keeps you on your toes. It's, how certain athletes will, cross-train? That's honestly what it feels like. Doing more PDH helps my EDH gameplay because I'm more on top of my triggers, because every trigger matters, as opposed to like, oh, I forgot to draw 1 card. That's okay. I'll play Mind Reflection next turn or something.
So yeah, tune into the stream, and if you want to play, hit up the thing. But yeah, you're right. I played a ton of Pauper this week because yesterday I had my first match in the PDC League that I plugged last episode.
Right. And what deck list were you playing in the PDC League again?
I was playing my Gelectrode list that we have discussed
Pinger
on
Tribal.
Various iterations of the pod. Yes, Pinger Tribal, which I felt pretty good about. I was up against Wyrox, who was on a Loyal Apprentice deck, which is one of the best decks in the as much as the format exists. This is one of the best ones.
When they did that format, where's the format, 6 months after officially announcing it on the home base, the article mentioned Loyal Apprentice by name as one of the best aggro decks, because, of course, with those lieutenant creatures in PDH, if they're out there, you're going to get the benefit, and Loyal Apprentice costing 2 mana and making Thopters is brutal.
Wyrox's deck is very much it's like a red deck wins, you know, but like it's just a bunch of haste creatures, Loyal Apprentice, and then a bunch of incidental burn, you know, 3 mana 3/2s that when they enter deal 2 damage. When you only got one opponent, those things are, you know, really good. And then we're playing, of course, all the good 1 mana burn spells, Lightning Bolt, Lava Spike, etc., etc., etc. We're even playing like Curse of the Pierced Heart, which is pretty spicy as well. They were on a balls to the wall kind of aggro burn strategy. I was on my Pinger Tribal, which is also kind of like a tempo burn strategy as well. So it was very much just a race to the finish. Unfortunately, I did not win. I got O2'd. The first game was very close. Wyrox actually mulled to 5, which was good, and then proceeded to go Lotus Petal Mountain,
which was bad.
Which went into Apprentice and then attacked for 3 immediately. Luckily, I basically was able to remove Apprentice every time it came down, and usually before it got to trigger, but that damage certainly adds up. Since they mulled to 5 and they kind of got stalled out on lands, I was able to kind of draw things out, but unfortunately I ended up just drawing a bunch of lands kind of in the mid game, and the final life total was like literally like 3-0.
Yeah,
it was very, very close, but unfortunately I did not eke it out. Kessick Flame Breather as well as Thermo Alchemist both did a bunch of work, as they did in our PDH games that we just had.
Pinger Tribal seems to be your thing recently.
Yeah, I'm really into it, I'm not gonna lie. Game 2 was just bad draws, bad variance. Like, you know, Wyrox played a good game. I just didn't do anything as well.
Hey, you know, it happens to the best of us, and apparently it also happens to you too. So
I started with a 1-lander and a card that could cycle for 1 mana, as well as a Careful Study, which is like the blue Faithless Looting.
Right.
And then I proceeded to draw 1 land, and then I didn't draw lands for the rest of the game, which really sucked because I was playing a bunch of draw spells, and I was able to play some burn spells to keep them off a few of their creatures. And I even somehow on turn 4, I was able to Treasure Cruise by only paying 1 mana, and I still did not draw any lands, which was very unfortunate. And I didn't draw that many burn spells. I only drew like 2 shots.
So what did you draw? If you weren't drawing burn and you weren't drawing lands?
Just a bunch of draw spells, really. And then also, of course, I only had 2 lands, so I had like 3 3-drops in my hand that were just kind of rotting there.
Yep.
Yeah, when Loyal Apprentice is able to, you know, make Thopters 3 turns in a row and continue to attack, I actually got like super comboed out. It was Apprentice plus 3 Thopters in combat, then Infuriate, which is +3/+2, targeting one of the Thopters. Then Reckless Abandon, 1 mana red sorcery, sacrifice a creature, deal 4 to target creature or player. Then Seal of Flame, which is the enchantment that you can sack at any time to deal 2 damage, and then Lightning Bolt to finish me off for Xaxes.
Yeah.
It was rough, but I had a lot of fun. Thanks to Wyrox for some good games. And I'm looking forward to my next matchup. Hopefully I'm able to win this one.
Electrode will have its day.
Good to play some PDC. I did play Electrode, I want to say like 2 or 3 times in game 1, and it just got killed. It just got killed immediately every single time. I never got to do anything with it.
It's going to be interesting to see how Electrode does against a deck that isn't red or is not playing burn.
I would need to look back at all the lists in the league, but I would say probably about half of them are red-based decks, but I think there's a couple Dimir decks in there. I want to say there's like a Golgari one as well. So I'll let you know as things go out and how it fares.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear about this league, and I'm also interested to see if this leads to changes in the PDC ban list versus the PDH. It's trying to be a separate format for good reason. It has the ability to, but these league plays and stuff will really show, kind of like we always see with the bigger formats, what cards are being used, which cards are being overused, and which should be kind of adjusted to see that. So if half the decks are red, it seems like something should change a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how that comes out.
Well, let's move on from my brew to your brew. Chev, you cheater. This is the Deck of the Week segment. What is this?
Deck of the Week. It's my second Deck of the Week, and I'm hyping my own deck. I'm here to give you the inside scoop, tell you in words what I told the database committee at the time. I wasn't on it until after I had submitted and this deck got approved. I wasn't able to count myself for a vote, although that would be a fun little political move. No, so in case you guys are unaware, I've talked about it a couple times on our After Dark, but the deck that I have on the database is a Duskmantle Guildmage combo control by the given words. This is a Dimir deck, so best colors, step up already. Duskmantle Guildmage is a 2-mana 2/2. Pay 3, 1 in Dimir. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 1 life. The rest of the card doesn't matter. That's what we're here to do, because the rest of the deck is a Persistent Petitioners build. Now, Persistent Petitioners is the only blue card that has a deck can have any number of them. It's a 1/3 for 2 mana from one of the new Ravnica sets. Tap 1 in it, target player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Okay. More interestingly, tap 4 untapped advisors you control, which is the creature type of persistent petitioners. Target player puts the top 12 cards of their library into their graveyard. So, we're hoping to get multiples of 4 petitioners, and then we're hoping to activate Duskmantle Guildmage, and we're going to be dealing 12 damage to people as we mill them. As Julian mentioned, even on our last podcast, mill is really not possible in 4-player EDH, especially at the Pauper rarity, at least at the competitive level. So you need to be dealing damage, and it's much easier to mill 30 cards and deal 30 life than it is to mill 100. So that's the kind of loop we're going for here. What's also important to note is the ability for 1 in Dimir, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard, deal a damage, that can be stacked too. So if you've got a board full of petitioners, you can activate this multiple times and get multiple triggers off each. So it's very important to remember, you have 6 mana open, 4 petitioners, you're hitting someone for 24. Now this accounts for 26 cards of the deck. You've got 35 lands in here as well. So like the Sir Conrad Rats list we talked about that just entered the database, a lot of the slots here are going to just the best of in Dimir. We're running Ether Spellbomb, Executioner's Capsule, Feed the Swarm, Into the Royal, Oubliette, Pestilence, etc. We're just running the best of because all of our slots that could be dealing with our main strategy are already full. This has the full package of transmute cards, particularly focusing on ones that transmute for 2, because that is how much a persistent petitioner costs. And honestly, the number of times that it's probably 75-25 that you're going to be looking for a petitioner over even a removal spell, because getting up to that 4 advisors is so crucial to the game plan that any way to tutor them up is going to be good. And the only reason that those slots of transmute are not dedicated to petitioners is because, there's a 1 in 4 chance you need a removal spell. The 2 things I do want to bring up, though, outside of the main Dimir cards that we're playing, 2 interesting things are Dramatic Reversal. This usually is seen to do stuff with, artifacts and dumb shit in EDH, but 1 in a blue to untap all non-land permanents you control. This is going to untap your petitioners, and in case you couldn't guess it, we're just going to tap them again and deal another 12 or another 24. So this is a great card to pull out of nowhere at instant speed. Everything you do here can be instant. Nothing needs to be activated as sorcery. This is before we got those activated as sorcery or only once per turn. So we skirted in there. And then the other piece of tech is Echoing Return. One of the cards, EDH is not going to be normally a home for Echoing Return, but for 1 black, we can return creature cards and all other cards with the same name from your graveyard to your hand. Another thing we can do is Path of Ancestry actually works here because our commander is of type human, and by having 25 other humans in the deck, it's tribal. And this also works with Echoing Truth, that can be our downfall, but also our savior. Even as we were just talking about in the PDH game we played, where Tor Wauke was able to cast an Evikar's Justice for 3 damage, that would kill all our petitioners. So while Echoing Truth can be used to bounce our entire board to our hand, we could also activate them at instant speed and annoy someone, but this can also save all of our creatures from imminent doom. Other than that, the deck kind of speaks for itself. We're running a ton of draw. We're running enough protection. It just got updated with DMU, so we've got Shore Up in here. And then, of course, Nurok Stealth Suit, Mizium Skin, Whisper Silk Cloak, everything to defend Duskmantle Guildmage, because the Guildmage is so crucial to our plan because we need that damage dealt. Milling is not really a viable solution. I think the only time I managed to mill effectively with this deck was against an Around Me build that Eric had run, which milled itself. So I won't consider that a absolute victory. I kind of just stuck the nail in the coffin.
I've known this deck. I've gotten quite intimate with this deck, let's say. I have seen it since its inception, and I've seen it grow, and it is it's a potent deck. That's for sure. You are almost basically a tribal deck, right? So you get to play a lot of good stuff, like you said, Echoing Return, Echoing Truth. Also Distant Melody for 3 and a blue sorcery. Draw a card for each permanent of a creature type that you control. That's usually going to draw you 4 or 5 cards, which is pretty dang solid. Petitioners are able to mill a lot more than you would think.
Yeah.
Let's just say a lot more than I thought when I initially looked at the deck, but then I played against it and I was like, where did my library go? Oh, it's in my graveyard. The deck is similar to a lot of the Rats decks that we've been seeing. We just talked about the Sir Conrad deck. There's the Gary deck. These decks that are just like, listen, we have 25 petitioners in here, which I think is almost on the low end. A lot of those decks
right.
We're playing.
It could definitely play a few more.
The sheer single-mindedness of petitioners, mill, protect petitioners / stop other people from winning the game. And we are playing, of course, all the best things in the 2 best colors to do that. So we love that. Like you said, new DMU cards. I see you even got the Shadow Prophecy in there.
Yeah, I love Shadow Prophecy, especially because this is a 2-color deck. I actually, I've been trying to keep a log of when this deck has been updated and why. Shadow Prophecy came in for Siphon Mine because I thought that even though Siphon Mine draws you an additional card and has that discard, 3 mana, instant speed, draw 2 is more effective for what I'm trying to do here. And you're exactly right. The petitioners are on the low end. This is largely based on the meta that it was playing in at the time, and it goes into that a little bit in the primer, where, if you have to deal with other aggro strategies, you need to dedicate more slots to removal, counter magic, draw, etc., while you're still going to have 1 out of every 4 cards be a persistent petitioner. If other decks are kind of gunning you down, you need to be able to protect yourself while also building up a board state. So there's a little bit of flexibility. Normally, I think we see around 30 cards of the given type. So especially like in that Sir Conrad deck, it's like 30, 32 rats, no tap lands. It's also mono black, so it doesn't have access to kind of be a little more dirtily like blue does. So if you take this list, I highly recommend making it your own and adjusting it to the meta that you're playing in to see, do you want slightly more petitioners, or do you need to dedicate this number of slots to removal and interaction?
I think that's 100% true. Always got to consider your own personal meta, but I think something that's kind of relevant to the meta as a whole, and we've discussed this, is the shift towards aggro. And me saying Pestilence is a good card is it's an ice cold take.
Yes.
But I think the fact that a lot of things in the format have 2 toughness and the petitioners have 3,
yes.
Being able to Pestilence for just 2 to clean out the board, I think pretty important, especially because you get to retain your petitioners. Yeah, even though that's not like me saying like, oh, look at this sick card that I found. It's called Pestilence. It's like, I think it synergizes very, very nicely with what we're trying to do.
Exactly.
That's the deck. It's the best of the best, and it does what it needs to do. And I think Duskmantle Guildmage is just such a cool and interesting commander, especially for a format like this.
Right.
I really like what you've done, combining the ultimate memes, the petitioners, with a way to just like literally blast someone for, like you said, 20 damage or something in a single turn, which is wild. So
my final point about this before we move on to the juicy new spoilers. If you're looking for a deck that you can truly bling out at the PDH level, that is one of the big things. PDH, we will advocate until the end of time that it is a relatively cheap format. This deck actually comes in on the very high end solely because Persistent Petitioners and any of those cards cost more than you'd expect, and then you're running 25 of them. But there are very few decks that have the ability to bling out as hard as this one, because Persistent Petitioners have gotten a ton of weird secret lair printings. We saw birds, we saw like every other thing too. So if you're looking for a deck that you could spend more on than several EDH decks, this could also be the deck for you. But the warning of this is on the high end. The Petitioners alone are $30, and that's normally where a PDH deck kind of falls in price. And running the best of cards, Muddle the Mixture, Merchant Scroll, Relic of Progenitus, Snuff Out, all of those, that added just another $20. And so it comes in closer to $80, which is $50 higher, like I just said, than most other things. So it is a very cool deck. It's a very fun deck, but it does come in on that pricier end of things.
It's worth it for the memes.
So enough about me. Let's talk about Warhammer 40,000, something that we don't know anything about, except that new cards are coming out October 7th in the form of 4 new commander decks, and I think 2 to 3 secret layers. I know one is focused around orcs. I know one is focused around Blood Bowl. And I know the third one is about something else. None of those words mean anything to me. None of them should mean anything to you. You're here for the random commons and uncommons. The chaff, if you will. The only thing of this premium set that will drop to prices that we want to afford. Let's talk about some of our new favorite commanders from this new set.
Yeah, so we have 25 new uncommon creatures in this set. We're just going to talk about a few of them because, frankly, I feel like a lot of these are fine supplemental things, especially in like an EDH deck. But we felt it had obviously less potential than something like a Dominator United, but overall a little bit less potential to have something that you're actually going to want to helm your deck. But there are a few options here. Chev, what do you have for your first one?
So the first disclaimer too. We are the competitive Pauper podcast, so we're going to talk about the cards that are most likely to show up on competitive tables. All of these are going to be fun, cool builds, etc. when you're playing more casually, but in the essence of, what can actually be competitive, there are very few. So my obvious pick for a competitive commander is Primaris Chaplain. It's 2 and a white and a black for an Astartes Cleric, a 3/3. Battle Cry. Whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And then an ability called Rosarius. But that essentially just means whenever Primaris Chaplain attacks, it gains Indestructible until the end of turn. Indestructible is incredibly powerful in PDH. There are very few ways to actually exile a creature. There's, Crib Swap. There's a couple more white spells. I think, does Ashes to Ashes exile, or does that just destroy?
It exiles.
It exiles. So Ashes to Ashes, but on the whole, and on on 3 of the 5 colors, there's not much you can be doing about a creature that's indestructible. So what I think this means is you really lean into the attacking and knowing that you're going to survive the attack. And so that means you can have things like Explorer Scope, Great Sword of Tyr, Delver's Torch, all those amazing equipment that are attack triggers. But, if they're on a creature that you don't know whether or not it'll survive, you're not going to get triggers on every single turn. So you'll be looking at the top card of your deck for land. You'll be growing Prismar's Chaplain with Great Sword of Tyr. Delver's Torch, you're going to be venturing every turn. And we just talked about how powerful Initiative is. Venturing is not as powerful, but still pretty powerful. Throw a Haunted Cloak on this guy, thanks to ASL for the Blind on Reddit when Scarecrow brought it up in the Pauper EDH subreddit. Like, there's so much you can do when you know your creature is going to survive. And on top of that, some of the other cards too, since we're in white-black, we can do Death Touch, right? One of the coolest things about Alcadron's Azra Oddsmaker deck is the, damned if you do, because my creature will, take yours down if you choose to block it. Well, if I give my indestructible guy Death Touch, it's not as, immediately, Synapse hitting as, First Strike and Death Touch, but you're still going to kill anything you come at with the Aspect of the Gorgon or a Maze Abomination or even an instant speed Blade Brand. So you've got a creature that is powerful enough, and you can equip it with so many things that it's going to survive and make a really good, move, that this is a great sort of Voltron-esque commander.
Chev, I think you're forgetting a very important other line of text on here, Battle Cry. We're in Ortsov, the color of tokens.
Yes. Yeah, so if all else fails, you can just make a ton of flying 1/1 spirits or whatever have you, and they're all going to get +1/+0, and that is going to be incredibly powerful. And since your creature with Battle Cry isn't going to die, you can kind of throw tokens at the problem until it becomes, solved. Since, again, we're in Ortsov, we can then have the cards that care about death triggers like Death Greeter and Falconwrath Noble. But really, there's just... It's powerful. You brew this in a casual pod, that Indestructible is going to make you lose a lot of friends very quickly. And then the token sub-theme to really drain them out when all of their attention is focused on getting this 4-mana 3/3 off the board, you can do well. And you're still sharing one of the best colors. You've got your removal. You've got Flicker and Regenerate in black if something were to happen. And then in white, give it protection from the colors you're worried about.
100%. Ortsov has been really going off between this and the Elias Pilgrim from Dominaria United.
Yes.
There's a lot of powerful stuff happening, and I 100% agree. The fact that this can attack on so many angles, it can be a Voltron commander, it can be a token commander, it can be a aristocrat commander, it can be a combination of all three, because that way your opponents can never truly shut off your avenue to victory. This thing goes hard. 4 mana, I don't love that it's 4 mana.
Yeah.
I wish it was a little cheaper, but still, we have plenty of ways to slow the game down, or at least protect it until it can get to attacking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm expecting some pretty good things to come from the Primaris Chaplain for sure.
All right, Julian, what's your first pick for potential in the DDB?
So this is my one that I think has a pretty good shot. This is the Venom Thrope. It's a 1, a green and a blue for a 2/2, and we just got keywords, baby. Flying, Death Touch, Hexproof. Now, first of all, we just talked about the Satyr Enchanter thing. Boggles, things with Hexproof, pretty crazy. We also have Flying, so we have Evasion, even though it's a 2/2. I'm definitely seeing some sort of Voltron strategy for this. We also just are in the combo colors.
Yeah.
So similar to other things we've talked about, you can just kind of have like a backup, oops, I win sort of thing. Hexproof is busted as well. And also, we are in the colors of Simic, so we have a ton of ways to just buff or put counters on.
Yeah.
And since we have Death Touch, and we can easily give Trample in green, that's a great way to get through, even if we have, even if they have a flying blocker, except we're in blue, so we can just give unblockable as well. So I feel like there's just no situation in which we're not getting damage in here.
Right.
Now, obviously, it's a little bit harder to get the full, like, I'm just swinging for 16 in one turn or something, but you never know. And of course I mentioned this on our Dominaria United thing, but we're getting more and more green cards that say deal damage equal to power
Yes.
or pseudo fight sort of things, which is a great way to get rid of blockers when we're in our Voltron deck, and we have Death Touch, so we can nuke anything that we want with this. I was also going to compare this to, I could have swore that we had a Nightveil Predator list in the DB, but then I checked back and it wasn't there. I don't know if it was removed or if it was a deck that we heard about in the community, but it never officially got into there. But Nightveil Predator is very similar. It's 4 mana for a flying, I believe also flying Death Touch and Hexproof.
Yeah.
And that is a blue-black list, so it gets a bit more of the control tools, but green-blue is still
I'll take green and its ability to just fight things, murder them, or I think it's bite is what the shorthand for dealing damage but not taking it is. But green, like you said, has been getting a lot of those effects, which is great. Green also has token generation, which is going to be super important when we're dealing with the main threat to Hexproof, which is
Edict
effects, right? And it also gives us just buffs and counters, like you mentioned. So there's a lot you can do in green that will make this an incredibly potent threat. And coming down a turn earlier is no small feat.
Yeah, for sure. So interested to see what Venom Thrope can do. Chev, you have a second pick. This one's a bit more speculative, but what do you got going on?
So when I try to evaluate a potential CPDH commander, the two sort of axes that I personally look at and know that I can pilot well is something that is aggressive enough that you're leaning on the commander, you're leaning on the strategy they provide, and you're trying to deal damage to the life points. And the other one is going to be a very solid value engine. Like that's what we see with Azra Oddsmaker. That's what we see with Garna. These are decks that I really enjoy. And so my less obvious pick for a really good CPDH commander is Acolyte Hybrid. It's 2 in a red for a 2/2 Tyrannid human. Whenever Acolyte Hybrid attacks, destroy up to 1 target artifact. If an artifact is destroyed this way, its controller draws a card. So, on the base level, you've got a 3 mana 2/2 that probably needs to attack, and it can handle Whisper Silk cloaks. It can handle Neurok stealth suits. It can handle the things your opponents have, but that's largely not what I see this creature doing. I see it self-targeting. I see it targeting our own artifacts to let us draw a card and then gain benefits from them. We've got the Wellsprings, we've got Mer Retriever, we've got the Workshop. We have all these things that have an ETB and an LTB, and they're usually like draw a card, search for a basic land, make a treasure. And so when we're doing that with this hybrid that we're swinging, we can sacrifice it and get 2 treasures and cards and etc. on our own turn, and it's just such an incredibly powerful value engine that I think it could be incredibly useful. Also, cards that make treasures like Big Score, Sticky Fingers, and Hoarding Ogre. All of those, you're sacking this treasure to draw a card. It gives you a lot of options. I just think the biggest things and what makes this less obvious is you're only in one color, and unlike something like Azra Oddsmaker, you don't have access to black to kill things or regenerate things. We talked about on our last podcast that Zada Hedron Grinder is able to exist in mono red because it is just such a potent commander, and I don't think anyone would make the argument that Acolyte Hybrid is near Zada in power level. So we're making up for a lot in the fact it's mono red, and we have less access to options. But at the same time, then maybe we can benefit from this being a less targetable commander because we are just dirtling a little bit with our own resources, and it's more the resources themselves than the commander that's the problem. But I think given the right resources, this could be a really cool deck that kind of deals with that sort of self-targeting and builds an interesting sort of situation you don't normally get to see in mono red.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I love the idea of, especially just if we have incidental like artifact tokens, like a treasure or a clue or something, being able to just cash that in for a card seems great. And I think there's a couple like mono red, of course, is not the best color combo in CPDH, but I think definitely something that makes use of like Reckless Fireweaver and Ingenious Artillerist.
Yes, yeah, lean into that artifact
ping through
synergy,
if
for
we're
sure.
making a bunch of that. And we do have options. They're not the most efficient options, but we do have combo options in here. We can, the combo that we mentioned when we reviewed Commander Liara Portier, which has like Junk Diver, Mirror Retriever,
Yeah.
Astronaut's Altar, and Workshop Assistant. I believe that is a completely colorless combo. So we can play that in here, and we are going to be generating value off those various pieces before we get to our combo pieces, which hopefully we can draw into them with the hybrid. So yeah, I think it's going to be, if anything, it'll be on the fringes, but I can definitely see the potential for a different sort of build. And certainly I think this could be, potent in normal PDH, but for CPDH, I think the stars could align.
Right. I think it needs a few more tools before it can actually get there. We probably need like 1 or 2 cards that very clearly align with it in a particular way. We're not quite there, but I think we're very close.
I have a similar card that is, I think there's potential here. This is a Sawtech Immortal, so 2 and a black for a artifact creature Necron. It's a 2/2. It has flash, and then it has an ability where it enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it for each creature that died this turn. I'm seeing this primarily in sort of like a mono black control deck. I'm almost thinking something like the Gary or Sir Conrad Rats list. Say we play a bunch of rats, and then if someone decides to wipe the board, or we decide to Pestilence or Evankar's Justice our own board, and then we can flash this in afterwards, and it enters as like a 9/9. That's pretty solid. And of course, black is one of the most potent colors, so it can kind of just stand on its own. We can maybe play a combo or 2 in there. But just the fact that this is huge and can, key off us playing the few board wipes that are in the format, I could see it making some impact. Once again, I don't see this being a staple, but if I had to grasp at straws, this is the straw I would grasp at.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something here too for it would be a truly horrifying deck to play against, but that's honestly what the art of a robotic skeleton is giving me. You're playing not only all the board wipes and stuff, but you're playing every flesh bag marauder. I think we're up to like 4 or 5 at the common rarity now, where you drop one of those, you're probably killing 4 creatures in that turn, and then this thing's coming down as a 6/6 for 3 mana. Also, in any particular case, you drop this and it gets killed. Black is the color of that regenerate flicker that we now have, where it's going to come back even with an additional counter because it itself died that turn. So,
right.
While board wipes might not be the sole reason that this is coming down huge, I think it's a great tool in a deck that largely is just keeping everyone's creatures off the board, either through removal, something like Ashes to Ashes is going to take care of. Oh no, that's not dies, but cards that kill creatures, watch out for exile. That plus edicts and board wipes, a little bit of card draw sprinkled in for good measure. This thing is going to come down with flash, if you can do any of this as instant speed, and really ruin someone's day.
Yeah, 100%. Chev, I think we should just give one last look through these potential things and see if there's anything else that pique our interest. Just shout it out if you see it. I was just looking. I want to say that there's a way we can break Flayed 1, 2 and a black, lifelink 4/1 when it enters the battlefield, mill 3. Like you said, we have all sorts of sacrifice outlets and the return to the battlefield if this card would die.
Yeah.
But self-mill always seems like powerful, but I'm not sure what we could do with it in mono black.
Yeah. My one.
You pointed
would be,
out Hexmark Destroyer to me.
What?
You pointed out Hexmark Destroyer to me. Do you have any? How are you feeling about that?
Hexmark Destroyer. I think Hexmark Destroyer probably not competitive, but it's essentially a 6/6 for 6 that has unblockable. It doesn't take much to make this a 2-hit kill, and the fact it has Unearth for 6. Again, these are expensive costs, but being able to play it for 6, it dies, then you can bring it back for another turn, so you're essentially getting 2 casts of it per commander tax. But, you're starting at 6 mana. By the time you get to 8 or 10, this is just out of range. I think if any card really has sticking power that we didn't discuss, it might be Trigon Prime. 2, a green and a blue for a 4/4. When it attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it and a 1/1 counter on up to one other target attacking creature. That creature can't be blocked this turn. Originally, I was hesitant because, it's not giving itself unblockable, it's giving something else unblockable, and for that thing to have unblockable, Trigon Prime has to attack. But we're starting at 4, and then it's growing in size. It only takes a few counters on an infect creature or something to make it count, or even just a big green threat that when it's saddled up with enough counters on it or enchantments, Trigon Prime can get through. You're probably playing honestly like 60 of the same cards that you would in a Venom Thrope deck, just because it's similar. We're attacking with a beefy creature and we're giving it unblockable. But again, I think it struggles from the fact that its benefit goes to something else, and you need it to attack to get that benefit. But should it continue to exist, or you manage to hit it with a Whisper Silk, this thing will grow to a truly terrifying size.
I just did a little look, and there are 12 creatures at common in blue-green that have Infect. And we have some ways to proliferate. So maybe, just maybe, you could make an Infect
You
deck,
can make a case for it, for sure.
with Trigon Prime. I think it would have that age-old issue similar to Voltron, where one person would go, and then you would feel the wrath.
Yeah.
I think the last card I just want to shout out real quick, Sanguinary Priest is such a boring card. 3 and a black for a 2/4 lifelink. Whenever another creature you control dies, Sanguinary Priest deals 1 damage to any target. We've seen this effect on a million things. This is like literally horribly boring, but when we can recur and sack and do all sorts of stuff like that, this may have a place.
Yeah, I feel like it might be up against that new guy we got in Dominaria. I think it's Elias. Or maybe it's Ellis.
The black-white guy?
Yeah. Or I think that it's actually a not a guy. But anyway, it's creature you control dies, deal 1, gain 1 for 2 mana.
Yeah.
So it comes down a little bit faster, and also in an additional color. So something like that, I feel like, Ellis, Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim, white and a black. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1. So with something like that,
that's just strictly better.
Yeah, it comes down
just
faster.
Strictly better. Never mind.
So I don't see Sanguinary Priest doing anything except for Warhammer 40k fans.
That's fair. But enough. Well, it's unfortunate that the uncommons were mostly a bust, but we do have 2 big downshifts to common that we can now play in the 99.
Yeah, we got Go for the Throat, which is a 2-mana black instant, destroy target non-artifact creature, and Unstable Obelisk, which is a 3-mana mana rock, taps for a colorless, or tap 7 and it to destroy target permanent and sack it. These are huge. I know, Julian, earlier in the week, you were comparing Go for the Throat to Cast Down, and saying that it might even be potentially better in a lot of lists.
Yeah, me and Brad, actually, who we were just playing PDH with, were discussing this on Twitter, and I think generally, especially in something like CPDH where the commander is so pivotal to everything, being able to play Go for the Throat over Cast Down, over a few different removal spells, really, it just hits so many things. This is generally better than most of the things that say destroy target non-black creature. So it's great, and I'm just trying, how many commanders are artifacts? I can think of maybe 1 or 2.
Right, very few. The number of times that I've been looking at an artifact creature and been like, man, I need to kill this, versus the number of times I've been looking at a black creature and thinking, man, I need to kill this, it's very leaning in one direction over the other.
Yeah, Go for the Throat has always been kind of like one of the most efficient removal spells, especially at 2 mana for only 1 black pip. So it's super great that we have it here now in the format, and I think it's going to quickly become a staple. Not that we don't have a ton of already great black removal, but this is one of the most efficient, I would think.
Yeah. And
Unstable Obelisk is also huge as well. Oh, sorry.
No, I completely agree. Unstable Obelisk, I think, is going to be great, specifically for red and black decks. One of the biggest sort of banes that can happen to you as a deck that doesn't have white or green is an oubliette on your commander. You can't deal with enchantments, And so you're kind of stuck with your commander in this zone that isn't out of the game and it's not in the game, and that can really derail so many plans. So having something that's stapled onto a mana rock that lets you deal with an oubliette once is way more than we had already. And I know there was some discussion. Universal Solvent, I think, is the name. It's a 1-mana artifact. Tap 7 in it, sack it. Destroy target permanent. Doesn't see any play, and it's like, well, okay, but that doesn't also tap for mana. So especially in colors that already need help with ramp, being able to have it come in and tap for mana is huge, and then have that as a sort of a in case of emergency sort of switch makes this a really powerful card and really beneficial in decks that care about their commander and can't deal with enchantments.
Yeah, 100%. This is just being able to out something like that is so important. And like you said, this can also just be a mana rock. It's not one of the most efficient mana rocks we've had, but it's there. And being an artifact, we can search it out with certain tutors as well as certain like transmute cards. So I definitely think it's something that, especially something like maybe that Zada list we were checking out, should consider including. But yeah, only 2 downshifts, but I would say both power downshifts for sure.
Yeah, most definitely.
Chev, somehow on our 3rd episode with the most individual topics at least to cover, we have come in at our lowest amount of time at a clean 56 minutes. Wow.
We're lean and mean.
We are lean and mean. This might even get down to 50 after editing. We'll see.
Yeah. Are there any final remarks you want to say since we got the extra time?
Yeah, I'd love to. Duskmantle Guildmage is for losers.
That's fair. Yeah.
Warhammer 40k was, frankly, I'm gonna say, you know what? I'll just be the mean person. Duskmantle Guildmage is for losers, and Warhammer 40k was actually kind of like disappointing in terms of CPDH and PDH. I would say. I think it's gonna be fucking sick for EDH, but I will say the ban list was solid, which is great. So that's my one. Actually, no, I have several upbeats. All the games that I played this week, with and without you, were also wonderful. Yeah. So here's to many more games in the future.
Yeah. So, that's episode 3. Tune in next week when we go over the fact that 3/4, I think, of Unfinity are Black Border. So we might be getting some new commons and uncommons there that we'll have to discuss here on the pod for your competitive.
Do we
leaning.
Actually have to talk about them?
Of course.
Is that what we're talking about next week?
Yeah, we're talking about it next week.
Oh my god.
Spoilers start tomorrow, September 20th, and they go through, I think, the end of the week. And that's it. That set also releases on October 7th. It's going to be a fun week. I'm going to have a great time, and I'm going to make fun of Julian the whole time for being upset that something with a name like Watergun Game is going to now see play in CPDH.
We're going to talk about the Acorn crap and all that, and I'll get mad then. I'll save getting mad until next episode, so just you wait. And that's the end of the show. We don't have a dedicated sign-off yet.